My name's Alan Newberry, and today we're going to talk about the stock removal process of making a knife. What we're going to do is look at the first part of the process, which is taking this bar of steel and turning it into this unheat treated knife right here. So let's go take a look. Whenever I'm making a knife using stock removal, I like to use a pattern. And in order to see that pattern, I first lay down a nice coating of Dicam, which is basically like magic marker in a bottle. So I brush that on there so that then, after I clamp on the blade real nice and tight, I can use a carbide scribe to scribe out the outline of the knife. Patterns can be made out of a number of different things. You could make it out of thin aluminum or plexiglass, plastic, fiber spacer material, but I like steel because the carbide scribe isn't going to really hurt it too much, especially if you harden it. Then you're going to get a lot of durability. After everything's been scribed, it's time to drill the pattern holes. Whenever I'm doing this, I'm not actually drilling all the way through, I'm just marking it. So I just drill in enough so that the spot is marked. Also, I like to use a number 30 drill for this because that is a nice size for an 1/8 inch pin. So that can come in handy later on. At this point, I'm done with the clamps and I'm done with the pattern. So I can remove the clamps, remove the pattern, and you can see that the knife is totally marked out, and you can see it very well where the carbide scribe has scratched into the metal through the Dicam. And you can see that the holes are just marked. They're not going all the way through. It's just a nice starting place for whatever your next drill is. A lot of times I'll like to drill a pilot hole for the larger ones with that number 30 drill. Whenever you're drilling, it's good to know the size of the stock that you're going to be putting through there, whether it's a thong hole tube or it's a Corby bolt or a pin. You need to know how big that is, and you need to make sure that your drill is actually at least slightly a little bit larger than whatever it is you're putting through there, because if they're the same size, it's not going to fit. So you want to make sure you get the right sized hole put through there, so it's better to measure twice and cut once. Now that we've got the holes drilled for the thong hole tube and the Corby bolt, we can start working on some holes to just kind of relieve a little bit of the weight that's in the handle, as well as provide a little bit more glue attachment area. After the holes are drilled, we're going to chamfer both sides, the top and the bottom, of each hole. What this is going to do is just kind of break that edge, which will help it to lay down flatter when we're grinding, and it will also help to get rid of areas that could cause stress risers in the heat treating process. We now have all our holes drilled, so it's time to go to the bandsaw to cut this out of the parent bar of steel. This is kind of one of the louder, kind of tedious processes, but it's really not too bad. But it does take a little bit of time, and if you're doing it at home, you may not have a metal cutting bandsaw, so you might be using a hacksaw or something along those lines, and then it can be real slow. The knife has now been relieved of the bar of steel that it originally came from, so now we're going to be able to go over to the grinder and finally start grinding on this. So when we're doing the profiling, a lot of times I will start with the 36 grit. It doesn't have to be a new belt, it can be a pretty worn out belt for profiling. In this case, it has a lot of bumps and things like that from the bandsawing, so I'm only grinding enough to kind of get that close to the line. I'm not even going all the way to the line. I'm just getting rid of those kind of big chunks in the areas where it's, not anywhere close to the actual line that I scribed. After I've gotten pretty close with the 36 grit, I will go ahead and move to a 60 grit belt. What I like to do there is just grind all the way up to the line, so I'm even touching the line with this grit. Then, after I have done the 36 grit, the 60 grit, I move on to a 120 grit belt. With the 120 grit belt, basically you're going to try to split that line in half. So you're kind of going right down the middle of that line, which will put you at a very accurate sized knife, so I can make a repeatable knife shape. here it is, all cut out, profiled. So it's time to move on to the next step, which is going to be marking the edge of the knife. In order to do that, I use a marker, or I'll use the die chem again. And so what I do is just darken that edge up. Then I'm going to take my calipers, figure out how thick this knife is, and then find out what the center point of the knife would be. Then I just scratch a line right down there. So just scribe that line in there, and then we're just going to take that line and go over to the grinder and grind up pretty close to that line to mark our edge. So we've got the flat platen lined up to where it's at as steep an angle as we can get. And then we're just going to grind a little bit on both sides and then keep looking down that edge to see how close we are to the line. And what we're shooting for here is grinding that till it's about the thickness of a dime. And what this does is makes it easier on the belts later on in the grinding, and it also provides a really good visual reference for us to know how far we want to grind. What we're working with today is a KMG grinder. The flat platen that we were just using, it's the same grinder. This is a different attachment. This is a 14-inch contact wheel. So what we're going to do now is we are just starting to grind those bevels in. You can see I've got one side started. I start up there close to the edge and just kind of slowly work that back towards the spine of the blade. So I'm trying to keep it even, grinding about the same amount on each side, trying to keep things even as I go along. As I'm grinding, you'll kind of see that I have my elbows up into my side, and they're kind of resting kind of on my belly and slash my kind of hip area, and just making a firm work rest. And I'm mostly kind of swaying to the side to grind. Sometimes I'll also move it with my hands a bit to get a little bit of extra length, but mostly I'm really moving my body as opposed to just moving my hands, because you want everything to be nice and steady so that you get nice even grinding. And also you'll see me reach off screen there a little bit, and that's me cooling the blade. If you'll notice, I'm not wearing gloves, so by the time you get to the end of that, it gets kind of hot. So I'm usually pretty happy to get my hands off the tip of that knife. The bevels have now been ground with a 60 grit belt and 120 grit belt, and so the next step will be heat treating. So we will harden it and temper it, then we will need to do the finished grinding, then attach handles to it and sharpen it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe got a little bit of information from it. Next step is going to be heat treating, so we'll do a video on that. So please like and subscribe so you'll know when that comes up. If you have any questions about this step or the next step, feel free to put them in the comments section below. Thanks.